the models, the controllers, and inside the models, all the functionalities that are available to the user, for example, to search the product, to get the product details, right? Apart from that, you can even add a product. All of these kind of functionalities we are going to build. We are going to build an end-to-end MVC solution for products. When I say end-to-end MVC solution, then we are not going to actually code the views. Rather than we are going to expose it as an API that we will leave for the front end to consume. For this video, we are going to write the model that is going to be our business logic for product. We are also going to write controllers that is going to be the first line of defense whenever we will get any request on any particular route. And yes, you guessed it right. We are also going to add routes. All the routes that are going to actually help us to call the corresponding functionalities. So without any further delay, let's just start. So first of all, what you have to do is you need to go to the controllers and you can add a new controller, that is product controller.js, right? Inside the product controller.js, we are going to write all our functionalities that is going to belong to the product, the logic for the product, and rest of the things, right? Okay. Apart from that, we are going to also make a new file, product.js inside the models, right? So we are going to have two files, product controller and product.js. Okay. So let's first of all try to build our business logic first, and then maybe we can try to go and set up our controller, and then we will also be able to set up the corresponding routes. So inside the product controller, we actually need to have first of all our SQL connection. So const SQL connection is equals to require. Inside our services, we have this folder of file of SQL connection. So this SQL connection is actually going to help us to actually set up the connection between the MySQL server on the Amazon cloud, and then actually even execute the queries there. Okay, so we are going to write few functions. So first function that we are going to write is list products, right? And let's say this time we are going to write the models with a different logic. Here you can see last time when I wrote my model that was inside category, I just passed a callback because there was no extra parameters that were expected from the user's end. But here, let's say we are also going to pass a data, or for the timing we can even avoid data here because later we are eventually going to add it. But let's say let's keep things simple and let's just pass the callback because we just want to list all the products. So we'll write a SQL let SQL is equals to select ID as product ID. I believe everyone knows about this, as it is alias for any column. So like the real column name is ID, but you are going to use it as an alias for product ID, right? So whenever we will be fetching the data, the key that we will be getting is product ID. Then we can say name as name, small name, right? Apart from that, we need price as price from products, right? This is something that we are going to have. Then we'll say let values, or let's see what was the convention we were using, let data, or let's say values only, is equals to this empty array. This is the same data array that we were having, right? And we are going to just fetch all the products. So first of all, we will say SQL connection dot execute query. Now this is going to actually execute the query. Which query? Which is written inside the SQL. If we are going to pass any values, although it is empty, but still we need to pass this array, and then we are going to get a callback. This callback is going to have an error and a result. If there will be any error, it will be reflected. Otherwise, in the result parameter, we are going to get our actual list of products. Okay, so we'll say the callback will be called with error comma result. And I believe everyone is aware about the fact that this callback is going to be passed by the controller to the model. Okay, so first of all, we'll do module dot exports list products. So now this is going to be available to our models, right? We are going to add few more functionalities as well, but for the timing, let's just keep it like this. Now we'll come to the product controller, right? In the product controller, we will first try to fetch const product is equals to require. Inside our models, we have a product model, right? Now using this product model, we are going to add all the functionalities for the corresponding controller, because now this controller is going to consume this product model. This is very important to understand, right? Okay, so we'll write a function list products inside our controller, list products. It is going to take a request and a response. I believe everyone is comfortable about the fact that inside our controllers, every time we are going to get an HTTP request object, which is going to store everything that has been passed to us within the request, and there will be a response object as well that is going to store everything that is we are going to pass as a response. Okay, so let or for the timing we are not having any request, so let's just directly do product dot list products, right? Now this list products is coming from the model, because this product object is the model object. Okay, and here we are going to pass that callback function, right? Inside our callback, we are expecting an error and a result to come. Okay, quite similar to category, right? So first of all, we will check if there is an error. We'll do console.log error. Then we'll say return res.status. What should be the status? Now the status should be 500 because there was some internal server error. Then send, and we are going to keep a message parameter. Let's say not able to fetch the products, and we'll pass success as false. So this will be the case when, let's say, we were trying to fetch the products and we were maybe not able to connect to the SQL, or maybe the query was wrong, anything like some server side logic is broken. That's why we are having an internal server error. If there was no internal server error, that means in the result parameter we are having all the products. So we'll say return res.status. Now the status should be 200 because we were able to fetch it. Dot send, and now we will build our JSON message successfully fetched all the products, right? We are going to have success as true, and then we are going to have a products parameter where we can pass directly the result, right? And then what we should do is we should try to expose this module.export. We should try to expose this because this will be later used with our routes, right? Now you guys might be thinking, there might be a doubt in your mind that why we are setting the status with this function and not something like this, status as 500, right? So both of the ways are correct. The best part about this function dot status is that it actually already has got a property status, right? And that property is detectable by all the API callers like Postman, like Insomnia, right? So if you will use this dot status property, it will actually embed that the request has failed. The other API handlers are going to automatically detect the fact that, okay, if this is a 500, then this is not so good, right? But if you will just add a status property here and then just add 500, it will be treated like any other property, and they will not detect any other piece of information, or they will not like actually understand what is going on with the request. But using this, the Postman softwares like Postman, Insomnia, all these API callers are going to actually understand, because this status property is embedded in the response, like directly in the response, and they are going to fetch this dot status functions property only. So this is a very crucial piece of information that I would like to that I wanted you guys to know, right? We can even demonstrate that, but first of all, now you know that our model is ready, our controller is ready. Now what's the next step? Yes, you guessed it right. We need to set up the routes, right? And where can we set up the routes? We need to go inside the route/API/v1. So here we will go to the index of the /API/v1. And first of all, let's get product controller. So const product controller is equals to require. Now we are inside v1. We'll first go one folder up, another folder up, another folder up. Now we are in the source now in the home directory. Now we'll go to source controllers and we'll say product controller. So here you can see we have successfully fetched the product controller. And now what we can say is hey everyone, welcome back to the video series on e-commerce application. In this video, we are going to actually start coding to router. Multiple APIs, right? This is something that is very common, that sometimes you have the version 1 of the APIs, sometimes you have version 2 of the APIs, and you migrate so on and so forth. So what we can say is, let's say inside the API folder, what we are going to do, we are going to set up a index.js, right? This is going to be the initial part of the route, and here we are going to set up basic route. So const express is equals to require express, right? And then what we are going to do, we are going to use the express router. So let router is equals to express dot router. We'll set up the express router. This is going to help us in the whole routing mechanism. And we'll say router dot use slash v1, and we will say let's say this thing, that const v1 router is equals to require. What we are going to do, we are going to actually set up a v1 router. I'll show you how, but first of all, let's pass this v1 router here, and we'll do module dot exports is equals to router. Right, now what you have to do is you have to go to the v1 folder and make another index.js. So inside the v1 folder, new file, index.js. Inside this index.js, we are going to actually write our routes, right? So we'll say const express is equals to require express, right? And we'll say const category controller is equals to, we are going to require the category controller. So where is our category controller? We'll go one folder back, we'll go another folder back, we'll go another folder back. Then inside source, we'll go to controllers and then category controller. This will fetch us the category controller. And now what you can say is, we need to set up a express router. So let router is equals to express dot router, and we'll say router dot get. We'll set up a get request, right? Slash category slash all, and then what we are going to do, we are going to call category controller dot list categories. So now you can see we have set up a route, and then the corresponding controller is there that is going to be called as the callback. And then you can do module dot exports is equals to router. Now what we are going to do, we are going to require this router here. So slash API slash v1 slash index, right? So this is going to be the v1 router for us. So what actually is happening? Now we will say that all the routes that we are going to have in this v1 router, they are going to be prepended by this slash v1. So whenever we'll be calling localhost slash API slash v1 slash category slash all. This is going to be the overall, I would say, routing mechanism that we are going to follow, right? Okay, so I believe this thing is set up. This thing is successfully set up. Now what we can do is we can come to our source, or let's say index.js, and here we have to fetch the route, right? Here we have to fetch the route. So we will say const, I will say API router is equals to require, I would say dot slash route slash API. Okay, and what we can do is, as soon as we have the API router, this thing, let's keep it as it is. And then what we can do is, we can say app.use slash API. Now, as I said, the URL is going to be localhost 3000 slash API. Whenever slash API as the URL will come, then you are going to call API router. This is something that we are going to do. Okay. So now let's just try to run our application, right? So let's say we'll say index.js. Okay, so there is some error. So let's see what the error says. It says that express dot router is not a function. Okay, let us check. Okay, where we are using it. Express. Okay, so here you can also see router does not exist. Did you mean router? So this should be capital R. Sorry, my bad. And here I believe also there should be the same thing. Yes, the router. And now if you will try to run the code, here you can see the server has started successfully. Now what you have to do, you have to open Postman, right? I've already opened Postman here, right? What you have to do, you have to go to new and you have to make an HTTP request. So you can select this HTTP request. First of all, here you can see, let's see the UI for Postman. So here you can see this is the get request. So you are able to see all the get request and everything. This is the URL bar where you will be actually writing the URL. There are some params. These are the query params if you want to add in the URL. Some headers if you want to add in the URL. If you want to add a body in your URL, then you can also do that. So all of these features are available. So what we can do is, just a moment. Okay. So let's say we'll write our URL, localhost 3000 slash API slash v1 slash category slash all, right? If you'll try to send it, here you can see we are able to successfully fetch all the categories. All the categories from the database are getting listed here. So this is going to be a great achievement for us, and this is going to be a, I would say, great step forward while writing our APIs. So actually you have written your first API, right? Now I'm going to tell you the detailed flow of how exactly everything works. Then we are going to go through all the code once again and we'll see what exactly we have done. Okay, so now let's just see that how exactly the whole architecture is working. So here we have our client, right? In our case, this client is going to be Postman. But if you have a front-end team or you are also developing the front-end, this client will be your corresponding front-end. What this client actually does is, it actually raises an HTTP request to the server. Right. This is our server, which is actually our node application. Right. If you want to see how we are sending the HTTP request, here you can see whenever you do a send, right, then you are sending a new HTTP request, right? On the server, actually what happens is, it processes the query somehow, it processes the request somehow, and then it is going to send back an HTTP response. Right, this is going to send back an HTTP response. You can see this is the HTTP response that we are getting. Now what exactly happens is, inside the server, if you will carefully look, inside the server, what happens is, there are 3 layers, which is actually models, controllers, and we also used to have views, but for the timing we are not having any dedicated views. So for the timing, I'll only show 2 circles of model and controller. So this is controller, this is model. Now what happens is that whenever the client makes an HTTP request, this HTTP request is made for a URL. You can see that we have added a URL here. So this URL is called as a route. Makes the request on a route, right? So whenever server receives the fact that okay, a new request has come on a route, for example /API/v1, I'll tell you how this whole /API/v1 hierarchy is going on. /category/all. So we can say that as soon as the server receives a new request on this route, the server tries to fetch that okay, for this route which controller is assigned. As soon as the server finds that okay, for this route this controller is assigned, it makes a request to this controller, and there are two parameters that it takes: request and response. This request is going to have all the details of the HTTP request that the client is making, and this response is going to be storing all the response details that eventually the server is going to give back to the client. So this is the request response that the server passes to the controller. Now the controller has to do the task that the controller actually interacts with the model. The model internally interacts with our database. The database is going to give model some result back. Model is going to read the data, manipulate the data, and then model is going to give back the data to the controller, and eventually controller is going to give back the data to the server, and the server actually returns the HTTP response. This is how the whole architecture works. In this whole architecture, we have skipped views because we are writing an API driven application. Otherwise, there will be a layer of views where the controller is going to give back the data to the views. But here in our case, what is happening is controller is just the first line of defense. It's a notion that controller should be thin, models can be thick. That means the whole business logic goes inside the model. I can write it here. The business logic goes inside the model. How the data should look like when you are sending it in the response, that thing can be derived in the controller. The database is going to store all the data that we are having inside our application. So this is how the whole structure works. Again, I'm repeating. First of all, you make an HTTP request to the server. Server receives the request. Every request is made for a route or a URL. Server sees that for this URL, which controller is assigned. So server reaches out to that controller with the request and the response. Like request is already sent by the client. Response the server is building. So this response object is that response object that the server is building. Then inside the control sees that okay, I have received a request, I have a logic. Inside my logic, I'm going to call a model. There is no certainty that every time you are going to call a model, but if you are having some business logic, then definitely you will call a model. So we'll call this model. Model is going to eventually call the database if it wants. It will receive the data back from the database. It will manipulate the data, give back the data to the controller. Controller will see that how the response should look like the status code, error message, success message, etc. And the controller is going to give back the request to the server, which eventually goes back to the client as the HTTP response. So all of this thing is happening on the HTTP protocol. Now, if we go back to our coding implementation, then let's see step by step exactly where we have done everything. Okay. So first of all, let's see the routes. Inside the routes folder, here you can see inside the routes, I have API. So how the folder looks like? Inside the routes, I have a folder API. Inside API, I have a folder v1. So how exactly this thing is managed is, sometimes you will be having some API based route that is going to give you just the response, not any views. Sometimes it can be non-API routes as well. So inside my routes folder, I have two kind of routes: non-API routes and API routes. What is API? API is application package interface. So this API is going to expose a lot of our backend features and functionality to the end user. Now the thing is, we can have multiple versions of the API as well. Right? Let's say we initially started building the API where we are just exposing things not in a very efficient manner, but later we optimized our APIs and updated it to some more efficient algorithms, right? So what we do is we maintain multiple versions of the API because some end users might be still using our V1 API, so we can't just directly discard it. We have to maintain it for some time, then we completely migrate to V2 and so on and so forth. That's why we have this folder V1. Now, whenever we are going to make a request, the request looks like this. Initially, what is your base URL? It is localhost 3000. 3000 is the port. Is the port slash. Now after slash, whatever we will write is going to be our route. So slash API. So this first, I would say, section is going to tell that we are going to make a call to an API. Then V1 version of the API. And then what is the API? Category slash all. So this is the actual API route. This is the version. Right. So let's see what happens. Inside my, whenever I will make a request, so like whenever the client makes an HTTP request, we receive inside our Node app. What is the first file that gets hit when we actually run the Node app? Yes, you are right. It is the index.js. This index.js file is going to get the request first. So we will say that we will add a middleware. How do we add a middleware in our Express application? Using use. We will say that app.use/API/API router. We'll say that any request, no matter what, but any request that starts with localhost 3000/API. /API is the prefix of the route. Any request that comes with this prefix should be mapped with API router. You will say, okay, that makes sense. What is API router? API router is defined in /route/API folder. Here you can see inside API folder. If you will go inside API router, this is API router. This is inside /route/API. There is a folder V1, and corresponding to the folder V1, we have this index.js. Now we can have multiple versions, right? So we can make V1 router, V2 router, V3 router. So we will say that now every request that starts with /API is going to come to this route. Now every route that after /API starts with /V1 should go to V1 router. Okay, where V1 router is defined, it's defined inside the V1 folder. We will go to V1 router. We are here. Now what we will say that now exactly after /V1, anything that starts with /category/all should be mapped with category controller.list categories. So we are first fetching the category controller. How we are fetching? We have to go back outside few folders, and then inside source controller, category controller, we have our whole implementation of category controller. We'll see category controller in some moment. We have also fetched our Express package. We made a router because wherever you have to make a router logic, you have to get Express router. And we'll say we will expect a GET request. We will always expect a GET request on /API/U1/category/all. And whenever we will get a GET request, we are going to map this GET request to the controller, category controller.list categories, and we are going to export this. Right. So one more thing that I can show you is if you will change the request to post and send it, here you can see cannot post. It is not able to find the corresponding API. But if you will again convert it to GET, you are again able to successfully fetch the API. Now we need to see what is there in the controller. So as I said, now the server has received the request for a corresponding route. The server will see that for this route, this is the controller. So we will go inside the controller. Inside the controller, we will be having the logic where we will be manipulating the request, creating our response, calling the model, etc. So see, we are first of all fetching the model from model/category. We are saying inside the list categories function, there will be a request and a response. We are not having much use case for request parameter in list categories, but we later will be having it when we'll be passing some data from the URL. So we'll call this model category.list category. This is the model function call. Which says that we are going to pass a callback. The model function expects just a callback. I can show you that as well. So here you can see this list category just expects a callback. We will say that when the category model has been executed and due to any reason there was some error due to which model function was not able to complete its task, we will be having this error variable field. We'll say if there is any error, we'll first of all print the error. So what you can say is, let's say if you go to the terminal right? Then we'll be able to print the error here, right? Okay. Apart from that, we will say that rest.status 500, that return a status 500, that is internal server error. Whenever you get a error which is caused by internal server logic, because model is core server logic, it's not due to the end user. There was no issue with the end user's request, because end user's request was correct. That's why we were able to map it with the controller. If you are not able to map it with any controller, then there is some issue with the end user's request, but end user's request is perfectly fine. That's why we have internal server error. So status code 500, and then send message success. Inside message you can write any message, and success is false. If there was no error, then this if check will not be executed, and we are just going to return status 200, that is okay, that the request has been fetched successfully. And then we'll do dot send and a JSON response. We'll write a message, we'll do success true, and inside categories parameter we'll be having a result, right? This result is going to be fetched by the SQL query. Now let's see how the query looks like. If we'll go to list categories, now here you can see we have fetch the SQL connection, right? This SQL connection is actually going to set up a connection with the server. As soon as the server connection is set up, it will execute the query as well. So inside list categories function, I have written my SQL query that I want to actually run on the server. Then there is a data property. Then there is SQL connection.execute. This function of execute query is actually going to execute the query. It will take the SQL, it will take the data that is going to be passed in the SQL. Here we have empty data, and then it will take a callback function. Whatever is the result of this callback function, we are going to internally call the callback function coming from the controller. So let's see how SQL connection looks like. Inside SQL connection, I have created some configuration, some backend configuration that is helping me to connect to the re-level database. Then what I'm going to do, I'm going to set up this pool, right? This pool is going to have all the configurations of the MySQL so that we can set up a connection with the MySQL server on the cloud. Then I'll be writing a function execute query. It takes the SQL, the data, and a callback. We'll first try to set up the connection. If we are not able to set up the connection, then there will be this error variable. This error variable will be fetched, and we'll just call the callback with error. If the connection is set up successfully, then we will do connection.query. This is going to actually execute the query. Which query? This SQL query, which is a string. It will pass the data inside the SQL query, and it is going to call this callback function. Right, inside the callback function, again we have error and result. Now let's say there was some issue in the query only. Connection setup was good, execution was good, but the query that we wrote was wrong or maybe not viable. Then also we can have an error. If we got an error, we'll again call the callback. Otherwise, this query has been successfully completed. We will close the database connection that we have set up with the prod, and then we are going to execute the callback with the error, which is going to be obviously empty, and the result that is going to store all the, I would say, categories for us. And here you can see this result is actually what? An array of objects, because we are going to have multiple categories. So this is the whole flow that goes behind the scenes whenever we are making an API call. This diagram that we have made here, is going to be very helpful for you guys to understand exactly how things work and what exactly goes behind the scenes whenever you are making a new API. Every time we have to just follow the same mechanism. We'll be having a route, we'll be mapping it with a controller. Inside the controller, we'll be mapping the request response with a model. Inside the model, we'll be having some queries, some business logic that we will execute on the database. Database will give us the response to the model. Model will give response to controller. Controller will respond to server, and server will give response to the client. That's it, right? The only thing that you have to take care about is the first file that we are going to execute is index.js. So every time you can start mapping, okay, which call is going where, and you can start using this thing. One very small piece of information is this is a middleware. What is a middleware? Middleware are those functions that are going to be called in between any function call, right? So this middleware use says that whenever you get any request that starts with a given string, call this callback function. This is the only use case of this. You can read more about how exactly app.use works, right? You can read more about its use case. But the best part about this session was we were able to write our first API, and that too so fast and so cleanly, right? You are able to fetch it, you are able to use the Postman, server is working fine, everything is going good. Now in the upcoming lectures, what we are going to do, we are going to build more features around it. We are going to see that what other features we can add. We are going to see different type of request going and coming back, so on and so forth. So that being said, we will meet up in the next video. Till then, take care guys. Bye bye and thank you.